And now I would like to hand over to Alan Botwright, Master Solutions Architect at Acquia. Alan?
Thanks, Shiv. Okay, could you go to the next slide, please, Shiv? Thank you. So, hi guys, my name is Alan Botwright. I've been with Acquia now for 6 years, and I've been involved with Drupal for 13 years. So I'm in the privileged position of being able to see what some of our 5,000 customers do, or not all of them, of course, but I've got a great deal of experience what works out there in the real world. For those that don't know who Acquia are, we're the company that Dries Weitart started. He began the Drupal project, obviously, in his dorm room in 2001, and he set up Acquia in 2007, mainly to meet the enterprise requirements for the growing Drupal project. And I'm pleased to say that 13 years later, we're here and with our 5,000 customers working across the board, and ultimately unlocking business value for our many customers using the benefits of open source, ultimately by de-risking Drupal in the cloud. We've kind of branched out over the years from what we call Drupal Cloud, which is the platform and service side of things, and the tooling around this. I'm going to talk a little bit about migration in a minute. And we've also got some other technologies that we are now collectively known as the Marketing Cloud, which is mainly our data personalization, inbound, outbound marketing data, customer data platforms. Next slide, please. One of the things I want to get into today is building a lot on what Tim was talking about earlier on. From our data at the moment, we were seeing like roughly 64% of people are sitting on Drupal 7. And obviously factoring in as well that we've now had an extension to to Drupal 7 now is going to be available for another year, supported from a security point of view at least as well, and the community. There's also what Tim didn't cover in his part is what I would like to cover around specifically the jump between Drupal 7 and Drupal 9. Now, it's true, of course, that this is what we're trying to encourage our customers to do, to go from 7 to 9. But importantly, it's taking advantage of the extra time we've now got to be able to deal with effectively the custom elements of that migration process. I want to get into a bit more detail around some of the challenges you're going to have in migrating, particularly large projects. And the next slide that I'm going to go to now, if you may, Shiv. This is like a typical project outline here. So looking at the sort of phases involved in migration and looking at a project that's somewhere around this mark between 800K and 1.2 million. So a larger size of a website in there around this point of view. Now specifically, the move between Drupal 7 to Drupal 9 without the benefits of Drupal 8 over the last many years, we've not benefited from some of the core benefits of what Drupal 8 brought to the table. And a lot of that was the ability to take what was originally supplied by custom modules in Drupal 7 and having a knowledge of the best modules to use. Drupal 7 configurations were typically quite varied, and it's based a lot on the experience of the particular Drupal developer to put together the right kind of application. And what Drupal 8 did was allowed you to have a much more of a standardized Drupal installation, mainly because a lot of the core functions were built into that. Now, coming from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9, obviously you haven't been through that process, so there's a lot of customizations and unknowns within there. Next slide, please. What we at Acquia are trying to do here, and when the technology is building on what Tim was saying earlier on, we're looking at how we can automate that process as much as possible. So it's building on some of the tooling that Tim referred to earlier on, but also taking it a little bit further. Our objective really is to reduce costs by at least 50%. And that is by helping to get some idea about scope of the migration process. So that means we need some intelligence around there. Even a discovery process typically in this is to understand where the custom code is, and importantly, which code we need to carry over and which functionality can be supported from core specifically, and that's part of this process as well. But we've been developing some tooling within Acquia for over a year now that's built into our platform specifically. Next slide, please. The idea of being able to take your application, this is the Acquia Cloud dashboard, where you can click on a button and effectively it's going to do an analysis of your code base. The idea there is it's going to give you an indication of what's immediately migratable for you, and give you some insight in some compatibility of modules, which modules are going to work, which one can replace existing modules that are there. But also we're looking at how do we deal with that custom element as well. So it's giving me as much information as possible to our customers so they can assess the amount of effort involved. Because effectively Drupal 7 to Drupal 9 is a migration path, but there's a lot of change to be made. And for the customers going from 8 to 9, that's straightforward. And that's part of what Drupal 8 addressed, and moving to 9, it continues on that tradition of making it much easier to upgrade. So what Acquia are looking to deliver with this tooling built into our platform is the ability to be able to click a button and automate as much, at least 50% of that effort, and certainly make it clear where custom code can be introduced back into the core distribution specifically. Next slide, please, Shiv. So for example, here it's an example of our early tooling around this, where you're clicking a button, you're going to get a report running the Acquia Migrate Accelerator against that. And ultimately, next slide, please, you're going to see a list of modules, compatibilities. Some of the tooling that Tim talked about earlier on is built upon that, but it's going a bit further. We're going to add a bit more context around the type of modules and the type of work that's involved in upgrading this process. So at the end of this, we have a good route to Drupal 9 with as much of the risk and effort that's involved in there. And I think from point of view of Acquia, for existing Acquia customers, there'll be Acquia customers on the call today, we're augmenting that with our own value add services from point of views of support, actually, and to drive customer success in this process. I think as well, it's also encouraging the ongoing success with Drupal more broadly. We know that if you've had a lot of value with Drupal 7, the treasure trove that's offered to you by, if you haven't used Drupal 8 and Drupal 9, unlocking that value to your projects, ultimately driving better digital experiences to create competitive advantage out there as well. And I think all of us, I didn't want to mention COVID, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think the idea of some of these digital transformation projects, certainly what I've seen is how quickly things have moved in the last few months. What was optional is no longer optional. People know this is the channel that needs to be right. And I've certainly seen huge amount of movement and people progressing very, very quickly with their projects, understanding that having a very solid, robust digital channel and sort of the tooling around that Drupal provides as well, having that available to drive customer engagement and digital experiences has never been more important. And on that, I'll hand it back to Shiv.